The three things that I want to talk about today, as far as how you can use technology tools to better assist your safety program. The first are your documents, whatever that happens to be, whether it's SDS, policies and procedures, program files, lockout, tagout documents, whatever it is, we're going to see some ways that we can, one, store them, and then two, make them accessible. The second element I'll discuss and go over are checklists. Any of your forms that are being filled out on paper, whatever name we want to give those, audits, assessments, observations, inspections, we're going to find some ways to digitally capture that information and then put that in a database for the purpose of reporting and making reports. The final thing that we'll talk about today is the training, how to deliver it, how to track it, and then how to make sure that everyone is retaking it as needed, and again, running the reports on it. So the first thing with your documentation, especially with things like SDS, if you're using labeling on secondary containers or program files, any type of documentation that needs to be made available to your people, is where are you going to put it? Are you storing it on site, meaning a filing cabinet or an office? Well, probably yes. I mean, that is an OSHA requirement. You have an SDS manual that's in the break room. You have your policies and procedures in folders in the safety office. But you can also place those online. And we have a number of different examples that we can use for online storage. OneDrive, Google Docs, Dropbox, some of these are free, some of them are paid for. It just depends on what you have. Some of you may already have a Microsoft SharePoint site, or you use JJ Keller for your documentation. What I'm going to show you next is some of the free ways that you can take your documentation and making them accessible by way of a QR code. So what I'm going to do, give me just one moment here. I put a few links on the screen. And again, this will be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you do want to use these links at some point on your own, or you're welcome to just type them in. These three links allow you to generate QR codes from links that you type in. So let's think about this for a second. If you have a document that's uploaded to your website, or it's in your OneDrive folder, you can generate a QR code that someone can then scan and pull up that file from anywhere. The benefit here is that you're making documentation available when and where it's needed. So yes, we have the folders, we have the binders, but let's say somebody has a secondary container full of a cleaning agent, or maybe it's acetone, and it gets opened and spilled on the floor. Well, how do they know what to do to clean it up? Well, they could go to the safety office or the break room, pull up the SDS, flip to the page, or you could put a QR code on there that when scanned pulls up that documentation so they know what to do again, when and where they need it. So I'm going to give you an example of doing that. So I'm going to switch my screen around for just a second. What I want you to see is that I've created a folder on my computer in my OneDrive. So this is a OneDrive folder. This could be a Google Docs folder. It just depends on what system you use. Again, Google Docs is free, a number of others are free. I'm going to take I have an SDS for Medline sterile alcohol prep pads. I'm going to right click on it, and from OneDrive, I'm going to copy the link. Now, depending on the software you use, the process might be a little bit different, but typically right-clicking on a document in whatever your online storage is will give you the option of either copying a link or sharing a link, and that's what we want to do here. So again, this is just an example. I'm going to copy the link, give it a second to generate that. So the link has been copied. It's been copied to my clipboard on my computer. So over in my browser, I'm going to switch over to, let's see if I have the tab. All right, so this is that's a funny one to remember, qrcode-monkey.com. I like it because it sticks in my head. So in the URL, I'm going to right click and paste. There's the fun and funky URL that I copied from my OneDrive. Now, if I want to get crazy and creative with it, I can set the colors. Let's say I want to do something, let's go with red. And a background color, we'll leave that white. You can even go as far as adding your own logo to it, which I've also saved. So I'm going to upload a logo from my OneDrive webinar that I'm using for today. It's kind of like the mini version of our logo that just has the guy with the hat on. The other options, I don't need to customize the design, but you can change the shape of the dots. It gets all kind of crazy and creative. But I'll click the Create QR Code over here on the right, give it just a second. And that red is not my favorite, so I'm going to go back and set the colors again. We're just going to go back to the standard black, create the QR code. And at this point, I can download it as an SVG, a PDF, or an EPS file, depending on how I want to use it. But if any of you wanted to try it out right now, you could take your phone, especially if it's an iPhone or an Android, open your camera and point it at that QR code. It should pop up with a little bubble that you can tap on, and it'll open up that PDF file that I have in my OneDrive on my computer. So I'll leave this up here for just a second for any of you that want to try that out. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask those of me. I'd be happy to answer those at this time. All right, so moving along in the presentation, safety documentation, which is basically what we just did. You can take your lockout, tagout procedures, your SDS, your programs, and create that QR code that makes them easily accessible. QR codes are everywhere. Everyone pretty much knows how to use them. As I just mentioned, you can use your camera on your phone, your mobile device to access them. It's really simple and really slick. So this is just another example. Take out your phone, open the camera, point it at that QR code, and this lockout tagout procedure pops up. Now, if you want to get fancy and a little more complex with it, you can have it bring up a program and then maybe add a quiz to it as well. I'll show you some of that in just a moment when I get into the checklists and inspection tools that you have available, again, that are out there. They're free, most of them are. You can use things like Microsoft Forms, you can use a Google form to create a questionnaire that someone could fill out after having reviewed a document. So once we get into the checklists, we want to make them usable. The last thing we want to do is implement something new that's more difficult than what we're already doing. Because to be honest, nobody wants to fill out a checklist to begin with. So let's keep it as simple as we can. And one of the simplest ways would be to use a spreadsheet. If you have Microsoft Office, create it in an Excel file. That's one option. Another option would be using digital forms, online forms, like creating an interactive PDF. If you have SharePoint, you can create forms in there. And again, if it's something in SharePoint or online, that form has an address, a URL. Using the technique that I just showed everyone to generate a QR code, you can create the form, then copy the link. You can see on the top of this one, which is a SharePoint form, I can click copy link, put that in my QR generator, and now I have a QR code for my inspections. If you have Microsoft Office or Office 365, again, I'm going to switch my screen for just a moment, over to my browser. You can create your own inspection forms using the Microsoft Form tool. Now they're constantly upgrading and updating, and they just added the new quiz option, but I'm going to show you the new form because again, it's really easy. You tap new form. Again, this is very similar to what you would do in Google Forms. And let's say that this is a fire extinguisher. You could give it a description or skip right down to the questions. So we're going to add a new question. I'm going to make it a choice, which is typically your yes, no, true, false. And we'll say free of tampering. Option 1 is yes. Option 2 is no. And then we'll make it required. Now, if you're going to do a lot of true false questions, one nice thing in this particular system is you have the copy option, especially when if they're all going to be yes, no's. I'll just do copy. So now I have another one that says free of tampering, but I'll say tag is present. And then copy it again. And you can see I just keep going, adding the different questions. Really mounted. No, and add as many questions as you want, but when you're done, sorry, I have to move my windows around a little bit. I can click collect responses, which then shows me who would have access to it and a link. So again, here we go with the links. Copy the link, go over to my QR code generator, pasting the link in there. Again, fun and funky link from the forms.office page. Create the QR code, give it a second. You can see it changed just a little bit. And again, if you held your phone up to this and scanned it, it would let you create an entry for my fire extinguisher inspection. Again, it's super simple. You just have to know the tools and how to use them properly. Once that information starts getting gathered, that starts to show up. I did leave it as only people in life and safety. Let me change that to anyone can respond. And once the information is collected, it then shows up on a different screen. Now, we're not collecting any data today, so I'm not going to show you that piece, but that is what would happen next. This is just another example of a much more complex system for gathering data. This is a hospital system out of the Northeast. It has multiple buildings. Each building has multiple floors for their fire extinguishers. So they wanted to create an interface where they could click on, I'm in the Cathcart building, I'm on floor number 3, here's the floor plan with the dots where all the fire extinguishers are located, the list of all the fire extinguishers are at the bottom. So it really just depends on what you need. How complex or how simple of a process or a tool do you need to use? And I always recommend start off with the tools that you already have and then decide, do I need something more than that or not? All right, so moving on to the training. This is another one of those things. Nobody really wants to take the safety training, but you have to. It's an OSHA requirement. So what we want to do is get in, get done, and get it out. And it's not just employees. You may also be training contractors, vendors, visitors. Make sure that all of them are able to use your system, and not only that you are able to use your system. That's one of the big oversights that we see happening when companies are looking for a learning platform is they look at the learner side, but they may not know to pay attention to some of the administrative reporting and back-end features, because that's where you're going to be spending most of your time. Do you have the ability to create automated reports or reminders, or maybe even delegate responsibility down to functional managers so that they can do the same thing, but just for their people, for their teams or groups? When you do decide on a learning management system, make sure that it has all the topics you need, that it covers the information that's required. And another option to look for in a learning platform is that it lets you customize or create your own content. Because yes, we have like the fire extinguisher, the forklift operator, the standard trainings that we have to do throughout the year, but you're probably going to have some that are custom to your facility, certain chemicals that only you use, or processes that are specific to your lines of work. Running reports, I can't emphasize this enough. If we have a system that gathers data, that's great, that's fantastic. But if it lacks on the reporting side, it's going to become frustrating for you over time. So make sure that it does, and that it presents it in a way that you can use it. Check out the graphs, the charts. Also make sure that it's customizable and that you can set things up like I mentioned before, scheduling the reports, making them automated. When we first started using one of our LMSs, now this was years and years ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago, one of my clients wanted a weekly Monday morning report. And the learning management system we were using at the time did not have an automated feature for that. So you might have guessed it, yours truly, me, every Monday morning between 8 and 9 o'clock, I would get to my computer, go into the system, run the report, email it to, there's like 5 or 6 different people, but all at the same time. It was one of those things that was just like, oh my gosh, why can't this be automated? So over the years, we've created our own learning platform that does have that functionality. So now I'm not getting up every Monday, or even when I'm on vacation or on trips, and running these reports, which it's the same report, just with refreshed data. A number of these slides have examples, different places that you can go to take a look at certain report formats. A lot of these are built in the tools that we've created, but again, this is built off of SharePoint or Office 365. If you have those tools, you can do this same thing. You can create the inputs, the interfaces to gather the data, and then create the reports as well. Or if you want, of course, we'd be more than happy to help you with that. Now that we have all this data, we're doing the training, we're filing the documentation and making it accessible, we have the inspections out there, what do we actually do with it? So yes, we have the reports, but what's the action? Well, corrective action, of course, is the most obvious. If there's something that's deficient, let's fix it, and then let's move forward. These digital tools give you the ability to do that in a much more meaningful way because you're looking at the data points and not just someone's idea of what happened. At the end of the month, you may ask your floor manager, well, did we do all of the forklift inspections this month? Yeah, I think we got them all done. Okay, well, that's okay, but did we actually? Run a report, take a look at it, and then drive positive behavior. If we did everything, that's fantastic. Reward your people, reward your employees. And it doesn't always have to be like the standard, the pizza party, I know, or giving them stuff. It could be more soft rewards, kudos, congratulations, that lead up to more of those physical gifts that you can give. That's what OSHA wants to see you do. We don't want to drive people not reporting. Now, I know when I say it that way, everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's obvious. But I have friends that I've talked to who work for companies that reward them with things like pizza parties or cash cards when their OSHA recordables, reportables, their 300 log numbers are low. That's, if OSHA sees a company doing that, that's a finable offense because you're incentivizing people to not report because, oh, if we have 0 incidents this month, I'm going to get rewarded. We want to drive the positive behavior. Reward people for doing their inspections, completing their training, reading documentation, improving the safety culture. You can also use this information for forecasting. If you're going to add another department or create another building, set up another location, you have all of this great historical data that you can learn from to better plan for the next place or phase of your company. So those last 2 bullets go together, the forecasting and historical data. So some of the key points to remember from this webinar are use the tools that you have. You have all of these things available to you. Collect the data and then do something with it. Take action. The most important thing to do here is make your decisions based on data, not just ideas. I know I said this phrase before, but now that we've collected that, we have, even if it's just spreadsheets of information, make decisions based off of that. So it's not just somebody's whim or idea at the end of the month or the end of the year. One of the companies that I worked with initially, again, 12, 15 years ago when I started here, they saw about a 60% completion rate for their safety training at the end of a calendar year, which is why they came to us. After the first year, and this is the same company that I was doing those Monday morning weekly reports, at the end of the first year, they were over 98%. Not because they were delivering training, the topics themselves were not any different than they were before. It's because they had eyes on the data points. They were able to see that it was Nathan and George and Don and Barbie who were not finishing their training. And so they were able to go and say, hey, Nathan, George, Don, Barbie, I need you to complete your training, please.